with news on Retribution's end goal, the new location for SummerSlam, and Braun Strowman's lies unravelling. It is time for the SmackDown review. SmackDown's opening was very Retribution orientated. Biggie and John Morrison were to be the opening match, but both men would get attacked, firstly by the initial 5 members of Retribution that we recognise, but then there would be a swarm of extra people. If you've been following my livestream previews, then on Friday you will have known that Retribution was about to grow exponentially, and we are going to be seeing more of that in future, with very few people, if any, getting unmasked for a while yet. In kayfabe terms, Retribution are the perfect angle to ensure that the WWE is forced to leave the Performance Center because of the amount of electrical problems that Retribution have caused. That of course means that the WWE can now move full-time live scheduling outside of this week's Raw, which has already been taped, to the Amway Center in Florida. Everything has already been moved and the setup is starting to begin, even though the vast majority of wrestlers still haven't been told that they're moving. We go to a quick backstage segment featuring a number of wrestlers, including Biggie, Chad Gable, Cesaro and Nakamura, a number of face and heels on both sides, speaking up and trying to unify against Retribution. Corbin tries to clout himself into position as the leader. Biggie steps up and prevents that from happening. We will see a match between Biggie and John Morrison later in the night. Immediately after this, the women essentially take over SmackDown, with a number of segments specifically geared towards the women's divisions, both on SmackDown as well as Raw and a little bit on NXT. Shotzi Blackheart and Tegan Nox don't get too much in the triple brand battle royal, but they do get enough to make sure that they're exposed to more eyes and people might be a little bit more interested. Tegan Nox in particular gets a good run late in the match. While in the intro to the Battle Royal, Bayley and Sasha Banks are introducing individuals, a lot of people after the introduction of Asuka from Raw are not introduced and just rush down to the ring. So immediately it's hard to keep track of everyone who's actually in there. However, there are a lot of Raw segments advanced here. Firstly, obviously the Raw Women's Championship, given that Asuka is there and she will be facing Sasha Banks at SummerSlam, but also when it comes to Ruby Riott and Liv Morgan facing off against the Iconics. That was also advanced, meaning that SmackDown, the show 1 hour less, is now building storylines for Raw, which is 1 hour more. The winner of the match is Asuka, who will now go on to SummerSlam to face both Sasha Banks and Bayley in individual matches. These odds are stacked pretty high against her. It really depends who she faces first, because they are far more likely to lose their title than whoever she faces second. That will be telling going forwards. Mandy Rose has a backstage promo with a very new and different look. It's a very different Mandy Rose, and someone who gets more promo time than she usually would. Sonya Deville would answer later in the night, but Mandy Rose here is challenging Deville to a hair versus hair match. I have a strong suspicion Deville is going to be shaving her head. Finally, in this particular run, Nikki Cross is standing around backstage and she discovers Alexa Bliss has appeared about 10 feet from her, and apparently has been there the whole time. She goes over to give Bliss a hug. Bliss is distant, shall we say, and states that she will still be involved with what's going on with Bray Wyatt and Braun Strowman. This will pay off later, but it looks like the partnership between Bliss and Cross is at an end. If you are a fan of this tag team partnership, please do let me know in the comments whether you think this is the right time for them to break up. Chad Gable has new music and some new attire. He gets destroyed by Sheamus. Later in the night, he would apologise to Matt Riddle, which does actually explain some more face-ish tendencies earlier in the night. Unfortunately, that does end up backfiring because Matt Riddle, after forgiving him, is attacked from behind by Baron Corbin. So this is definitely a team that they have going right now. It does look like Vince McMahon has plans to push Chad Gable now. The new music is a very good sign of that, but it's been a rough start, I've got to say. He's been brogue-kicked 3 times in 2 weeks. AJ Styles and Joseph Park, see if you recognise the name or any other name he might go by, come down to the ring to present their findings of a statistical analysis of AJ Styles' possible contenders. AJ Styles finds that there are no possible contenders. He also plugs his Twitch stream. AJ Styles is in an interesting position right now where everyone is talking about what he does next, and that gives him leverage to pretty much do whatever the hell he wants, which is exactly what he's doing. Jeff Hardy has apparently heard enough. He comes down to the ring and challenges AJ Styles to a match. AJ Styles says, "No, and that means the match is made for next week. This is a match that would definitely have been on the SummerSlam card, but it has been moved off the SummerSlam card, similarly to what I expect to happen with the SmackDown Tag Team Championships. SummerSlam would end up being 5 or 6 hours long, and the WWE are trying to avoid that. They also made mention of the Payback pay-per-view, which is planned a week after SummerSlam on this show, and one thing we are seeing in WWE social media is the idea of who should challenge Sasha Banks and Bayley for the Tag Team Championships. That means it's unlikely that Asuka will get a rematch to the rematch of the rematch that she had for the Raw Women's Championship. All 3 of these rematches have come in the same month. The Lucha House Party, who are the good guys, steal the Tag Team Championships from Cesaro and Nakamura. A lot of belt theft going on nowadays. The match we have is Nakamura versus Lince Dorado. Cesaro and Nakamura get the upper hand and are about to turn the screw when Kalisto returns, which definitely makes this particular team that little bit more exciting and that little bit more interesting because it's a bit of proven championship pedigree. I still don't see Cesaro and Nakamura losing the championships, and I still do not see this match being on the SummerSlam main card. It is slightly more interesting to me now though. In the past there have been a number of suggestions made to me that a lot of people backstage in the WWE believe that Alexa Bliss is the next breakout Hollywood star that will come out of the WWE. She gets a chance to prove that, and honestly does so very well in a backstage interview asking about what happened with The Fiend. She doesn't answer that many questions, and when she does, for example suggesting that her relationship with The Fiend is like a moth to the flame, the interviewer just changes the topic of conversation. Her acting is very good, the writing not so much. Biggie versus John Morrison is technically our main event match as it's the last match of the card, but it is very easily distracted because there is a Retribution attack that happens backstage at the same time. Retribution run through what looks like the catering area, lock someone in a toilet, you get a sight of a leg, thankfully that's all, and spray paint something on the walls. I've got to say, Retribution are much more interested on SmackDown than they have been on Raw. You wouldn't think it's the same guy writing both shows, would you? While there are clear threats that this would interrupt the actual match, a lot of WWE wrestlers appear at ringside to protect the match, and then when Retribution are shown backstage, they rush back to clear the place out and apparently do so successfully. Biggie gets a clean win against John Morrison, but before really anything can advance too much, Braun Strowman comes down to the ring. His head is newly shaved and there is a real intensity to Braun now. This is probably some of his best promo work, calling out The Fiend and saying what he plans to do. It's vicious and I like it. Instead of The Fiend coming down to answer Braun Strowman, Alexa Bliss comes down, at least she comes down first. Bliss asks about Braun Strowman's comments last week, essentially saying that he didn't care about Alexa Bliss. Braun will not look her in the eye. Upon being adequately challenged, he does turn, he looks at her, she slaps him in the face, at which point he picks her up, holds her up for a while. I know she doesn't weigh that much, Alexa Bliss, but Braun Strowman clearly showing some strength, just walking around with Alexa Bliss in the air, pressing her up and down like nothing. At this point, the tables have very much turned. Last week, it was The Fiend threatening Alexa Bliss to try and call out Braun Strowman. Here it is Braun Strowman threatening Alexa Bliss to call out The Fiend. Now, we know that Braun Strowman does care about Alexa Bliss, but this is a very good twist in the tale. Last week, he lied. He got The Fiend to let Alexa Bliss go, but now Alexa Bliss is compromised, because when he does actually hurt Alexa Bliss, or at least he seems to because the lights go out at the time, The Fiend comes to rescue her. The Fiend shows weakness. The Fiend shows compassion. This is a very interesting story. My Twitter poll for this show is a very high positive. It is a 46% good and a 29% great. People are very high on SmackDown right now, but last week was not a good show. The week before was a great show. It's very up and down right now. I would love it if SmackDown could gain some consistency. What I will say though is that its top storyline right now feels like its top storyline, and it has not felt like that since Roman Reigns left. Meanwhile, Deville and Rose are putting on an absolute tremendous masterclass of storytelling there. Every beat they have done fantastically, although what I will say is that we now have Asuka challenging Bayley And once again, when it comes to the women's division, you have so many women waiting for their opportunities, and essentially since WrestleMania you've been focusing on a very small handful. If you want to create new stars, Sasha Banks and Bayley need to lose those championships, and they can't go to Asuka. She can have one, she can't have both. I would like to see Mandy Rose win at SummerSlam and then take the SmackDown Women's Championship from Bayley, so that that can be part of the feud with Sonya Deville and then go into Gen Pop going forwards. We need to see some new challengers. We need to see Shayna Baszler getting more airtime. We need more. Please let me know what you thought of SmackDown down in the comments. Remember to subscribe for more exclusive news in every video. I've been Tom Colahue, and thank you for joining me.